That was Homer Simpson.
In this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics.
2015.
That's when Bart goes to another dimension and makes Homer. Okay, so what I want to talk about in this chapter, I'm going to actually talk about 6.2 first.
Are you okay with just looking in the back of this?
Yeah, just cut it into small pieces. Anything else? They'll tear it into small pieces.
Oh, they don't feel.
I want to talk about a molecule called ATP. You ever heard of ATP?
Yeah.
Did I tell you the ATP story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. ATP is the energy molecule that cells use. Okay? It's called adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. And almost every cell uses it to carry around, to move energy from one place to another. And what it is, it's basically a nucleotide. Do y'all remember what a nucleotide makes up? 10 points. If your group can tell me where you'd find a nucleotide. We already talked about nucleotides a little bit. And I got them, I kind of throw them up on the board like this. Sometimes they stick.
Wait, Mr. Willis.
Where would you find a nucleotide? What kind of molecule? Nucleotides.
Like what it's made of?
No, what molecule has nucleotides? Nucleotides make up certain molecules. I'll give you a hint. I'll put two of them together like that. Nucleotides make up certain molecules. Where would you find them? All right, purple, I'll give it to you. Blue, I'll give it to you.
It's right.
Yep. Peach, I'll give it to you. Yes. Green, that's what I was looking for. Yes, white, that's what I was looking for. DNA has nucleotides. DNA is made of these nucleotides. And if you take one of the nucleotides and look at it, a nucleotide has 3 parts to it. Can you name the 3 parts for me? Let's just shout it out because we don't have much time.
Phosphate.
Sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. Sugar, phosphate, nitrogen base. Remember those? Well, ATP is basically a nucleotide, and here's the sugar part, here's the nitrogen base part, and instead of having 1 phosphate, it has 3 phosphates. That's why it's called triphosphate. This part is called adenosine, and this part is the 3 phosphates. Now, if you remove a phosphate, you know what you have? You don't have adenosine triphosphate, you have
Adenosine diphosphate.
adenosine diphosphate. And if you remove one more, which I can't do here, what would you have?
Adenosine phosphate.
Adenosine monophosphate. So we got adenosine triphosphate, adenosine diphosphate, adenosine monophosphate. Anyway, this is kind of the battery that's roaming around in cells delivering energy from one place to another. And here's basically the way it works. Energy is put into this molecule to make it bond, to make its pieces bond together. If I put a little bit of energy in this molecule, this phosphate will connect there. And the energy is stored in that bond right there, in the bond between 2 phosphates. And now it's carrying around energy. And it can cruise around in the cell and go over here. And then, if this bond is broken, the energy gets released. So it can move energy from one place to another. It can physically, the molecule can physically go somewhere and break that bond and release the energy onto something else. And the something else can then do something. Like, for instance, a membrane protein can change shape and open up and let something through the membrane. Yes?
Back in the bathroom?
Yes. Great question. Any other questions here about this ATP? ATP, I will designate it, I'll show it to you often up here on the board as something that looks like this. See that? Adenosine 2 phosphates in this third phosphate, and bam, when they break apart like that, that's when energy is released, and then bam, when you put them together like that, energy has to be put into the molecule. Energy has to come from somewhere else to be put into the molecule to cause it to come together. So, like a flagellum, for instance. Have you ever heard of flagellum? Is this tail that whips back and forth? You ever heard that?
Yeah.
So it might take an ATP to come up to the flagellum and break apart and release some energy, and that can cause that flagellum to whip a little bit. In actuality, it might take 10,000 ATP to get one flagellum whipped.
That's a lot of ATP.
Do you remember when the vesicle is moving along like this? Being carried along that microtubule? Remember that? Every movement of the motor molecule takes an ATP. So if a vesicle is going to move all the way across the cell, those motor molecules are doing that. That's using a lot of ATP there. I just used about 28 of them. We could go to the video and count them, how many times I did that. But anyway, it's a lot of ATP. Imagine all these vesicles moving around the cell a lot. It's a lot of ATP, right? So, that's what they show here in this diagram. This diagram is showing... Can you get a light for me over there, John? Appreciate it. This diagram is showing, here is a dp plus p. That's what we call it when it's not together. A dp is that, plus p, it's not together. But it can be put together into a TP. And what that takes is some kind of reaction, which we call an exergonic reaction, that yields energy, and that energy is scooped up and used to put together ATP. And one of the reactions used to put together ATP is the breakdown of glucose. This molecule, you all remember this as glucose? There is a organelle in the cell that takes in glucose and rips it apart. And the energy will come out of this glucose molecule. This glucose molecule has a lot of high energy bonds. And there's an organelle that takes glucose in, rips it apart, and all the energy that comes from tearing that molecule up is used to put together ATP. 10 points if you could tell me what that organelle is. The organelle that tears apart glucose and uses that energy to put together ATP. There's a name for that organelle that I've actually already told you this. You should already know the organelle.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
What's the organelle that tears apart glucose and uses it to put together ATP in a
I'm
cell?
pretty sure.
Does it actually put it together?
It puts together ATP. It puts ADP and P together to make ATP. Yes, green is correct. Green knows it. White is correct. White knows it. Anyone else? Going. Go up. Peach. Peach is wrong. Blue is right. And purple's wrong. It's the mitochondrion. Y'all remember the mitochondrion? The mitochondrion is a big organelle that looks like this. Whoops. Here's a mitochondrion. Kind of looks like this. And here's what happens in the mitochondrion. Glucose goes in. Oxygen also goes in. And that molecule, which has lots and lots of high energy bonds, is broken apart. And when that molecule is broken apart, the energy comes out of that molecule. The breakdown of glucose is an exergonic reaction. An exergonic reaction, you should know this from chemistry, releases energy. And the energy that comes out of the breakdown of the glucose is picked up by ADP and P. And ADP and P are put together to make ATP, and ATP leaves. So this molecule is broken apart and you can't see it anymore, and the energy comes out of it, and ADP and P are put together using the energy from the breakdown of glucose. We call that a coupled reaction. We got two reactions going on here. The breakdown of glucose is one of the reactions. That's the exergonic reaction that's talking about here. And energy comes in and is used to put ADP and P together to make ATP. That's a coupled reaction. We couple the breakdown of glucose reaction with the putting together of ATP reaction. Energy is transferred from that molecule to that molecule. That's a coupled reaction.
Would that be Exergonic then?
Well, it's putting together the ADP and P coming together. That's an endergonic reaction. The breakdown of the glucose, that's an exergonic reaction. Now, what it says in the first part of this chapter, in 6.1, is it talks about the laws of thermodynamics. Do you know the laws of thermodynamics? Have y'all ever studied them?
I dabble.
You dabble in thermodynamics? One of the laws of thermodynamics says that whenever you have a conversion of energy, it's not 100% efficient. Meaning that some energy is wasted here in this conversion. The energy that comes out of this is put into this molecule, but some of the energy is lost. And it's lost as heat. Have y'all ever heard that before? Mm-hmm. That no conversion of energy is 100%? That some of the energy is lost as heat? And that's what happens here. When energy goes from this molecule might contain a certain number of calories of energy. And whenever we take energy, we break that molecule down, and it's scooped up by this molecule. Some of the energy is lost as heat. That's normal. Everybody touch your cheek. Can you feel it's kind of warm? That's proof of the laws of thermodynamics. The energy is not 100%, the energy conversion is not 100% efficient. Some of it is lost as heat. And that's your body heat. That's the heat you feel. That's from chemical reactions happening in your body that aren't 100% efficient. Comes off. Whoops. Are now very dizzy. Sorry about that. We're back, so it's going to be okay. Are you?
Did it just fall?
Is it broken?
No.
Is it off?
We're good. We're good.
Okay. All right. Yes. Questions? Oh, we have. Well, hold on. We have. Is it still surviving? We have some Melodia. Thank you. Did it work?
Yeah, it worked.
Good. Very good.
Are we going to finish that?
We are. We're going to do Melodia this next coming time when we do the last. Yes. Okay.
So like when you're sick, when your forehead gets really warm, is that just from like more inefficient reactions going on?
More reactions happening, and in your body, your brain is saying we need to turn up the temperature of the body, and that's because viruses and bacteria don't survive well at high temperatures. So your brain is saying, let's do some reactions faster, get the heat up, and that'll kill some of these viruses and bacteria. Yeah.
So why are there like cold-blooded animals, like reptiles, that don't like our
Cold-blooded animals are just not quite doing as many reactions as we are, and they also don't have a good way of keeping the heat in like we do. We have layers of insulation that help keep the heat in. So cold-blooded animals actually they do reactions slower, and they don't keep the heat in as well. So their body temperature is colder. That's why they call them cold-blooded. Good thinking. Yeah. So the first section, 6.1 tonight, talks about thermodynamics and how energy moves from one place to another, and the conversions aren't 100% efficient. And the second chapter talks about ATP. And so it's not, the reading is not very much tonight. Here is a glucose molecule. This glucose molecule is very organized. There's a term for organization in biology. Have you ever heard that term? The term is called entropy. Entropy, the higher the entropy is a measure of disorder. And if you have a lot of disorder, we say you have a high amount of entropy. Have you ever heard that before? Did you do this in chemistry?
Yeah.
Entropy. And so glucose, in this formation is low entropy, and in this formation is high entropy. See, this is glucose when it's all together, and here's glucose when it's all broken down. The glucose molecule will break down into carbon dioxide, that's that molecule, and water, that's that molecule. So we actually, glucose will go from a state of low entropy to a state of high entropy. Things like to be in a state of disorder. Have you noticed this about your room? You know, if I have a stack of papers, they're very orderly, but they don't like to be that way. In nature, things naturally go to a state of disorder. If I throw the paper up in the air, it comes apart, you see. It goes from orderly to disorderly. So your room, you got to put a lot of energy in it to make it nice and orderly. And just over time, it's going to become disorderly.
That could be a metaphor for your life. You have to put energy into your life, or else it will go to shit.
That is beautiful.
How about
I love it.
Wow. Go me.
So glucose will naturally come apart into these molecules. And we will cover that over the next two chapters. We're going to show you how glucose breaks down and how ATP works. So when
what you said?
When this it requires a lot of energy to put into these molecules to make them bond together. That requires an input of energy. Just like it requires an input of energy for me to clean up this mess I just made, I have to put in all this energy to put these things back together. So think about that when we're talking about these molecules. To actually put together a glucose molecule, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. And the energy used to put together the glucose molecule is in the form of ATP. And the original energy source is sunlight. Sunlight shines down. Plants use that sunlight to put together this glucose molecule. And that process is called photosynthesis. Energy from sunlight is used to build the bonds in the glucose molecule. That's photosynthesis. And then the glucose molecule goes to the mitochondrion and is broken back apart to make the ATP. That's respiration. Read 6.1 and 6.2 tonight. It's pretty short reading. Finish logbooks by tomorrow. And we are